Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's talk, and thank you very much for that, Jen. Thank you, everyone, for coming along. I can see some familiar names and faces, but for people I've not met before, I'm Michael. I work with Lead Scotland, giving training on using technology in an accessible way. And really, my focus is on getting the basics right. I could spend, I could do the really, really complicated stuff, but it might go over some of your heads. I might not get it right, and we're not really going to be maximizing the impact. If we get the basics right, then everyone's starting off on a really good footing. To give you a little bit more background about me, I don't come from an IT background, so this isn't really, really tech heavy. So if you're not coming to this from an IT background, that's perfect. I come to this from a disability and accessibility perspective. So that's what we're doing. We're worried about that, and we're just looking at how we can use computers to make things better for disabled people and people with access needs. So as I sort of touched on just there, over the next hour or so, you're really going to see you don't need to be an IT expert to improve accessibility. And the flip side of that is, come the end of this hour, even if you're not an IT expert, there's no hiding. There's no excuses because you don't need to be very good with computers. This talk is part of a series of webinars on creating accessible digital spaces and more broadly using programs like things like WordPress to their full potential. This is the first of two talks on creating accessible content and accessible spaces, and we've also got one in 3 weeks' time about accessible cyber resilience. But there's one next week as well on making digital spaces accessible. Sort of following on from this, we're quite a large group, so what I would suggest, if it's all right, put any questions that you've got in the chat as we go through, and then come the Q&A at about 3 o'clock or so, I will just work my way through those. Once I've done those, the floor's open to people to shout out. My email address is going to be on screen as well, so if you want to send me an email afterwards, then that's absolutely fine. But yeah, otherwise I'll get sidetracked and I'll spend 20 minutes answering one question. Everyone who needs to leave at 3:30 is going to miss the end of the talk. And that has happened plenty of times. So I've learnt my lessons, and yeah, questions in the chat, and then we'll go through those. I'm going to ask a couple of questions during the talk. There's going to be a poll. Just go with it if you want to. If you don't feel comfortable taking part, that's absolutely fine as well. But that's sort of enough preamble from me. We're just going to dive straight in. So just before we do that, can you just give me a wave or a thumbs up or something if you can see me, hear me, and see the screen I'm sharing? Perfect. I should have done that at the beginning, shouldn't I? Right. So I'm going to start by just talking about what accessibility is. And we're going to be thinking about layout, navigation, and forms in terms of website accessibility. But before we get stuck into anything, we're just going to ask, what is accessibility? Now, accessibility is something that you might have heard of. You might have a fuzzy idea because it is a fuzzy concept. But at really the basic sort of level, we are just about breaking down and removing barriers. So particularly for this, we're coming to this from the perspective of disability. So removing barriers that stop disabled people being able to engage with something or being able to use something. But actually, and this is something which will become apparent throughout the talk as well, it doesn't have to just be from a disability perspective. It could be from a more broad inclusion perspective as well. So the first question I've got for anyone, and this is just something which you can pop in the chat, can anyone think of an accessibility issue that they might encounter in their everyday lives? It doesn't have to affect you personally. It does not have to be IT related. So I've got an example here. Level access from the street to the train. I live on Orkney. There's no trains up here. So this really doesn't affect me. But this is just a really basic accessibility issue which we could think of. So if we've got level access from the street to a train, then we've got all sorts of people who are going to benefit. Wheelchair users, people with mobility aids, people with impaired mobility but who don't use a mobility aid. And then thinking about this from a broader inclusion perspective as well, pushchair users, people with children, people with suitcases, people with dogs, bikes, everything like that. If we've got an 18-inch gap between the platform and the train, then that's an issue. We might have to get someone to get a ramp if we're a wheelchair user, perhaps. Not every station has someone who's there to do that, and that could be that can be a huge source of distress and it could be a huge problem. So I'm just looking through the stuff in the chat. We've got some fantastic examples. Um, people not having literacy skills. So yeah, having a presentation like this where it's very heavily text-based isn't necessarily very accessible. Hopefully, I'm getting around that because I've got a script and I'm going to say what's on the script. So if you're not a reader, if you can still hear me, you're going to gain exactly the same information. Rob's put font type for people with dyslexia. That's a fantastic example. We're going to cover that next week as well. But yeah, if you've got a really decorative font, you see them on some like menus in restaurant. I'm going to reveal my prejudice, but sometimes you go into a restaurant and you look at the font on the menu and you think this is going to be horrible. But if you really fancy sort of cursive fonts, they're really tricky to read. And if you've got dyslexia, which can make reading that sort of font harder, then having that poor font choice is a big accessibility issue. Text laid over images, it's from Rebecca. And again, we're talking about that next week. I don't want to go into too much detail, but if you've got a visual impairment or you're blind, you might not see text in the same way, or you might not be able to access text in the same way. So if text's over an image, then we're putting a huge barrier up for lots of people. Subtitles, and that's from Elaine. Thank you, Elaine. That's a really good example. Subtitles, according to a poll by the RNIB, were the biggest accessibility issue facing disabled people online. I think that was from the end of 2019, or maybe early 2020. So having subtitles on videos is such a big deal, and it's something which you can do so easily, and people very often just don't do. I don't know if anyone saw, but in the news about 2 weeks ago for, I think it's British Sign Language Day, this morning, I think it was, the one with Philip Schofield on, they had a sign language interpreter on, and they did a couple of things in sign language, and then that was it. So really a sort of token reference to it. When they uploaded the clip to Twitter, did they put subtitles on? No. Quite the error, and rather badly ironic, given it's trying to include deaf people with hearing impairments. So those are some really good examples of accessibility issues. I think we've touched on things here which, like with the train thing, it's not just benefiting people who have a disability. So with subtitles, if I'm at work busy on my phone, not doing the work, I might be watching a video on Facebook. If you've not put subtitles on there, I can't access that. Now, that is not as important as making sure it's accessible for people with a hearing impairment. But nevertheless, if you've got subtitles on it, I can still access it in a different way. And that is important. And also it's worth noticing that accessibility issues don't necessarily stop people being able to do something. They can just make it more difficult. So if I'm getting onto a train with a suitcase, a big step, it's not going to stop me getting onto the train, but it is going to make it more difficult. And that's what we're thinking about with this. So we're not necessarily completely excluding people outright from something, but we're just making it more difficult. And actually, we don't want to be doing that. So accessibility is based on 4 key principles. Oh, I've clicked too far, but that's okay. The first of these principles, these are called the PAW principles, and as we go through, I'll talk a little bit more about these in relation to different things that we talk about. But the first principle is things need to be perceivable. The next thing is that things need to be operable. Hopefully this is all going to catch up in a second. There we are. Things also need to be understandable. And finally, things need to be robust. Now, by robust, it really means that they need to work consistently and in exactly the same way. In today's session, we're going to be focusing predominantly on the perceivable and the understandable elements of the PAW principles, because these are things with massive impacts and easy fixes. To get the robust stuff right, we might need to be IT experts, and this isn't really the best format to be doing, that. So we're looking at making sure things are perceivable and things are understandable without needing any real specialist knowledge. We are going to touch on some of the operable stuff as well, but really, if we can get these things right, we have gone a long way to creating really good, accessible content. So, I've just got a bit of lag on my PowerPoint, so hopefully we'll zoom through in a sec. Maybe. Right, yes. So now we've thought about what accessibility is and what accessibility is made of, we'll have a think about why it's important. So I've got a couple of statistics about disability in the UK, which have appeared on the screen already. So the first is that in the UK, 14.1 million people have a disability. So that's about 1 in 5 people. And this next statistic is from Scope's Big Hack, and that's in 2019, less than 10% of websites were accessible to everybody. So 90% of people with a disability are going to be impaired in some way. No, sorry. People with a disability on the web may, no, I'm not explaining that statistic very well. It's much clearer on the screen. 90% of websites may impair people with a disability in some way or another. And this is from the end of 2019. This was mid-December, I think this was released. So this is really quite current. And over the last year with the pandemic, those 90% of websites will not have gotten their act into gear. So there's a huge scope for improvement. I can't imagine anyone here, myself included, Lead included, would actually, their organisations are going to be in that 10%, which is where it's accessible to everyone. We've all got room to improve, and that's what this is about. So, a very quick recap, and you'll find I do this a lot, just as we go through, just to sum up the last points that I've made. But accessibility is making things easier for people to use. Most of it's coming from a disability perspective. If we include that perspective in our designs, then we're going well towards the accessibility side of things from the offset, and that's really good. And accessibility makes things better for everyone. So if we're not thinking about accessibility, we might well be hindering ourselves as well. Today, we are covering 3 key accessibility sort of concepts. We're going to look at layout and navigation and forms. Once we've done this, we're going to have enough time to just about squeeze in how we can review our own organization's work from an accessibility perspective, some key takeaway points, and finally a Q&A. Now, obviously, pre-pandemic, at the end of this, there'd probably be biscuits as well, but that's sort of on you to organize if you want them. I wish I had. As we go through, we're going to be thinking about these things predominantly from the perspective of using WordPress. Now, there's 2 reasons for that, or maybe there are 3. 3 reasons for that. The first is that 41% of the internet has been built on WordPress. So 4 out of 10 of you, your organization's website is likely to have been built on WordPress. Leeds is built on WordPress. If any of you have made a website just sort of personally, you've probably done it on WordPress. So we're looking at a really big chunk of websites, and using broad brushstrokes, we're reaching a sizable number of people from the get-go. Secondly, WordPress is really good for small and medium-sized organizations. So if you're working for perhaps a smaller charity, perhaps a regional charity, chances are it's been built on WordPress. The government's website isn't built on WordPress because they've got a huge department which deals with making websites. Tesco's website isn't built on WordPress because they've got a huge department. Lead, they've got a couple of people who know how to use a computer. So it's built on WordPress. And if you're working for a smaller charity or a smaller organization, it's probably on WordPress. And finally, WordPress is really simple to use. It's one of the best content management systems to build a website on without needing to be very good at IT. There is no one on this in this meeting who could not build a website on WordPress this afternoon, even if you've never done anything like it before. It might not be the best website in the world, but you could do it in the afternoon. If you wanted to log out now, come 5 o'clock, you'd have something. So anyway, we're going to dive straight into layout. And we're going to be thinking about how we can master the basics of layout to create accessible digital content and spaces. At a really basic level, layout is just how the elements of your content appear on the screen. So we're not talking about any specific elements. So we're not talking about how do we lay out pictures to be accessible, how do we lay out text or anything like that. We're just like, how are things actually set up on the screen? It is the foundation for all accessible content. And we're going to come back to this in next week's talk when we look at pictures and videos and all these sorts of things, because it's important there. But we are just talking about having a really, really sort of foundational understanding of layout and how we're going to use that for accessibility. We're going to look at two principles for layout today, or two different aspects of layout. The first is simplicity, and the second are using headings correctly and the formatting of headings. But first, we're going to think about simplicity. So simplicity, ironically, is quite a complicated thing to get right. But for us, there are three things we're going to think about. So everything in your digital space, and so that could be a website page or indeed a website, needs to be relevant, which should appear on the screen any minute now. So by relevant, we mean useful and, oh, there we are, useful and sort of consistent with what people are expecting. If I've seen an article for if I'm doing my online shop at Tesco's and I want to buy some bread, if I click onto the thing with bread, I expect that page to be about buying bread, or to be so I can add the bread to my basket. Things need to be logical. So information or whatever you've got on there needs to be presented in a logical format. So for example, if we're discussing an image or the contents of an image, we need to make sure that that text is next to the image. And finally, it needs to be streamlined. And by that, it needs to be free from any extra elements which contribute little or nothing to the actual page. Obviously, these are all really subjective. These are, really broad brushstrokes laws, and everyone could probably find a different way of interpreting them to their own stuff. But the reason that we're worried about these three things are because if we get simplicity wrong, we can have a really big impact on disabled people, and more than just disabled people as well. We can have an impact on everybody. But we'll have a think about how simplicity does affect disabled people. First things, if we've got complex layouts, it can be really difficult to find and absorb information. So a complex page layout might present a barrier to visually impaired users with learning difficulties. If you're using a screen reader, having a really complicated layout might well make it more difficult to get around as well. Key information can be scattered and hard to absorb. So rather than just having on top of having a difficulty finding things, it can be really difficult to actually absorb and retain information when it's spread out or laid out badly. And again, that's really going to impact people with learning difficulties, people with screen readers, people with impaired mobility as well. If I've got 10 steps to making a perfect baked potato on my website, and you have to click through 10 different pages to find out each step, that can be really, really difficult. And finally, if we've got loads of stuff which is just all bells and whistles, that's really distracting and energy sapping. If you're working with people who've got maybe something like dyslexia or ADHD, autism, then it can be really, really difficult to keep focused on what you're trying to focus on when you've got carousel menus, when you've got images popping up, when you've got a video which starts playing, etc. So going back to those core principles, simplicity is all about things being perceivable and things being understandable. So we're not worried about things working. We're not worried about things being consistent in how they work. It's just, can people actually perceive things, and is it all done in an understandable way? Now, I'm going to just jump off the PowerPoint a second. Can you all still see my screen? Fantastic. I'm going to show you a website to really illustrate why simplicity is so important. This is quite infamous one way or another in terms of not necessarily getting everything quite right. So if you've got a weak disposition, please do look away now, because this is actually horrific. I really can only apologise. It's going to take about 45 minutes to load up because there's just so much going on. But yeah, if you're not a fan of the NAF, yeah, look out the window or something. But when it has loaded up, if you can see anything which is particularly difficult, I don't know if the internet's going to cope with it. Oh yes, here we are. Pop it in the chat. And just, yeah, we'll have a little talk about it in a second. This is Ling's cars. According to Ling, it is the best car leasing place in the northeast of England. There is far too much going on here. This is a real place as well. You can go and get yourself a car from her. It's mine. I've spent so much time on this site doing various accessibility talks. It'll come to the grave with me. But I'm going to try and scroll through and just show you a few little bits where there's perhaps a little bit more than we need to make this accessible for everyone. So firstly, if we're trying to look at this Citroen here, everything, when you hover over things, they move. Because this site is so complicated and has so much going on, for most people, there is a bit of lag. So you move your mouse across it to get to whatever you're finding, and then a couple of seconds later, everything's moving because you've moved your mouse across it. Looking at this, we've got lots of things changing. We've got Ling's little head here, which is vibrating around. She's riding a motorbike around the world. There is so much stuff here to distract you from the Citroen which you're trying to buy before we get anywhere else. Talking about the sort of the layout side from information being spread out, we've got lots of different cars that she's got here. There's more information buried right down at the bottom. So we've got all of these cars on the left-hand side, but once we've gone past those things, she's got this tiny little menu on the left to try and pick information out from. And then, yeah, we've got some sort of small print down at the bottom, but it is buried right at the bottom. If I was looking to lease a car, I might not think to scroll all the way down to the bottom of this to find this information. And having gone through this, it is really, really difficult to find this on other pages, which is fine if you're, ordering a free sample of wallpaper or whatever. But if you're buying a car, having the small print easily accessible is probably quite important. And there we are, we've got Ling again. There is an awful lot going on. And then just looking at this middle bit, we've got an information overload. There's too much to really pay attention to. We've got lots of data presented in sort of complicated ways. This is, if we were to click onto these cars, this is about as much information as you get, and it's just put in a tiny little box, a few little sentences. It's really difficult to pick out all those details by sight. So I'm going to stop sharing this now. We're going to go to an article by the BBC to have a look at what something slightly more accessible might well look like. So this is just an article about Lidl. Lidl's gin looking too much like a company's gin. There's nothing particularly impressive about this, other than it's laid out nice and well. So there's not huge volumes of information all rammed in. All of the information which is relevant to this is presented in one place. It's just in this middle column. You get down to the bottom, and that's it. There's nothing extra further down the page. Anything like that. It's also, despite the fact there is a lot of content on this page and lots of links to other things, it's not that busy. There's a really clear layout of, you've got the column with what you're looking in, and then you've got menus on the side, menus up at the top, and other stuff down at the bottom. Now, what's really good about this, and this is something which works well for lots of news organizations and other places as well, the menu at the top is really small and unobtrusive. This is on every page and it's always the same. So you don't need to look at that. You don't need to have massive amounts of information there. It's only taking up the top top quarter, top fifth, because it's on every page and you don't really need to have your eyes drawn to it. Stuff on the side, that's linking within the site, but it's still quite small, lots of pictures. So you're aware that there's a menu there, you're aware that there are different links, but again, it's not taking up too much space and it's not distracting you from the stuff in the middle. And finally, down at the bottom, that's when there's lots of color, there's lots of different things which are a bit more interesting. You've gone through what you're trying to get through, now something which might interest you. So we're going to go back to that PowerPoint now anyway. I have to stop the share. Right, and then go back to the PowerPoint because, sorry. So I've left Ling's cars open. That's why everything's going so slowly. Right. Hopefully things are going to work a bit more quickly now that Ling's cars is closed down. Right. That's more like it. So no, it's not, is it? Sorry. Like I said, I'm coming to this from the disability perspective, not the IT perspective. Whilst I'm waiting for my PowerPoint to reload, I'm just going to carry on talking about what the next concept is. So that's headings. So headings are, again, we're barely scratching the surface. We are at the very, very basics of how to create an accessible layout. Headings are really important for text-based content particularly, but on any web page, you're going to have a heading of some kind, even if it's just the name of that page. And getting that right is really important. So it feels really basic. I'm sure you sort of know what a title is and how a title works, but we're looking at the very basics of accessibility because that's what people get wrong. So headings and titles structure your content and allow people to find information quickly. So they do this by making it easy for people to jump to or jump between information or blocks of information and find the things which are relevant. So this is true for people who access things visually. So if you're looking at Wikipedia or whatever, you might just scroll down until you find the thing which is interesting to you. If you don't access things visually because you use a screen reader, having properly formatted headings means that you're able to just jump between sections rather than just having to listen to the whole, we'll stay on Wikipedia, listening to the whole Wikipedia entry for something until you find the one sentence which you're actually interested in. So on the subject of Wikipedia, we're just going to jump back to that. There was a slide to go with it, but you're not missing too much by not seeing it. Chrome share, here we are. So we are on the page for the Arts Council England, but on my script this is actually supposed to just be England, but they've changed the contents page on the England entry. So we're looking at Arts Council England because they haven't done that. If I start saying about the Norman conquests or something, just ignore me. So looking at this, we can see we've got a really clear, unambiguous title up at the top, Arts Council England, which lets us know exactly what the page is about. And then each section in the contents and scrolling down has got its own title and subtitle and stuff like that. This means that it's nice and easy for us to go through, as I said. And like I said, if none of these were here, if it was just a long block of text, it would take me forever to try and find, the 90% of its music budget went on opera in 1998. If we were looking at something which is a bit longer, maybe I was doing some homework on, I don't know, Wales. The Wikipedia entry for Wales is encyclopedic. It's huge. If I was doing something about the Eisteddfod, that's right down at the bottom. It's about 24 pages worth of reading to find out about that. So it would be really inaccessible if I was just being asked to just scroll through until I could find it. We're going to have a look at creating headers on on WordPress. So I've got this open, but I've got Zoom jumping over it. So I'm just going to open something in WordPress. This is a website which I use for doing accessibility training. If you were to go onto it, then there are a couple of things which look really, really weird and really, really inaccessible. And that's because that's how they're supposed to be. They're training exercises rather than just not practicing what I preach. But here we are, headings. So we're going to have a look at how we can create headings and how we can actually format them. So I've got that contents list here. I'm going to pretend that I'm doing a Wikipedia entry. I've got the contents list, but they're not formatted as headings. So the first thing to do is you highlight what you want, and then you wait, and then you might have to wait a little bit longer. It's plausible you'll have to wait even longer still. But when it comes up with a sort of bar, you just change it from paragraph, so that's just blank text, to heading, and then you select the heading level. Now, the first thing that I need to do whilst I'm waiting for this is create a title. So I'd select H1 for this. Now, H1 means that it's a heading and it's level 1. So level 1 is the highest level, and that means it's the sort of the very top. And you can work your way down all the way through to H6. For each section, they're of equal importance, so they're going to have the same heading number. So I'd start with headings as H1, and then contents is going to be H2. History, let's create governance and administration. They're all going to be less important than history because they all collapse down into history. So they'd be H3. Looking at this in a bit more detail now, you can see we've got 3.1, 3.2, 3.3. You might have already seen where this is going, but they're going to be H4 because they all collapse down into governance, and that collapses down into contents, and that collapses down into headings. So we follow the rules that we follow this hierarchy. I like to think of it as like it's the gears in a car. If you drive, you start off in first gear, and then you move up to second, and then you move up to third, and then you move up to fourth, each time you change. So when you move up through the gears, you must move up sequentially. You can't go from gear 2 to gear 4. And with headings, you can't go from H2 to H4. You must go to H3 next. However, going down, you don't need to do that. So if you're at gear 4 in a car, you've done an emergency stop, you still have to, you go straight back to gear 1, and then you move back up through. So if you're doing it with headings, you've gone to H4, you've finished everything that you need to say about the influential employees, you go back down to the next level. You don't have to go all the way down to 1, because that's headings, but you go back down to the next level. That's fine. You don't have to go H4, H3, and then back to H2. I'm really sorry, this should be loading up. Oh, not, it will do when I'm in edit mode, won't it? Okay, right. So I will show you what this looks like in just a second then. One of the other really important things about using headings, and I'll show you how to do this in a second as well, is that we can make headings links. Now that's really important both internally in a document and externally as well, or internally in a website and externally as well. So I can only apologize that this is going to be painfully slow again. Right. Perhaps what the best thing to do would be is just to come back to that, because I'm conscious that we're at 35 past now. Yeah, if it's all right, we're going to come back to this. In just a tick. But yeah, we'll just head back to that presentation. So stop the sharing.
Michael, your computer has the Friday afternoon vibes.
Oh, yes. Oh, some point I'm going to have to do something about it. It's not today, clearly, but it's not playing ball. Right, I tell you what, it doesn't want to go into presenter mode, but that's absolutely fine. If we can cope with it looking a little bit scruffy, I think we'll have to do that, just so we can press on. We will come back to that, and I will give you a demonstration of how that works. So the next part of our talk is about navigation. Navigation is how people get around your content or your space. So it's interactive, and it includes things like menus, forms, links, buttons, dialog boxes, anything like that. The default way to navigate is with a cursor. So that's normally a mouse, but if you're on a laptop, it might be a trackpad. Touch screens as well, if you're looking at this on a tablet or a phone. That's navigation. And finally, some people use keyboards to navigate. Now, that you may sort of dabble in keyboard navigation. You might press enter when you've done your password rather than click enter. But some people can only use keyboards and would really struggle with mice. So some of you might be thinking, how do you do that? How can you navigate with just a keyboard or just a mouse? A keyboard and mice do different things, so how can we use one as the other? If you're looking at this on a smartphone or a tablet, then actually you do it already. If you smartphone or tablet, it's just got that screen, you can type on it, you can select things on it. So that's one way which you can use cursors and keyboards in the same navigation format. But keyboard navigation, there are 3 things that we need to know about. So I'm going to come back to the BBC, and I'm just going to come up to the top. Hopefully the news isn't too depressing. It always is, but fingers crossed it's nice and good today. Using my tab key, so that's above the caps lock on your keyboard, I'm just going to start scrolling through things. Now, you might have just seen a button appear saying skip to content.
Michael, are you sharing? You're not sharing screen?
Am I not?
No, just so you know. We can't see what you're doing.
I see. Okay. That is unfortunate. Give me just 2 seconds and we will. Right.
There you go.
How about that? Fantastic. Okay, so I'm on the BBC. Sadly, the news is pretty terrible. I've just pressed tab and I've gone straight to the first news story. You can see it's underlined and highlighted in black. I can press it again. It's going to take me to the next link. Again, next link, again, next link. And then I've gone to the next one. So that's Glasgow remaining in level 3. And then, so I'm just scrolling through using the tab key. I'm not using the mouse. It's going to take me a bit longer to get where I'm interested in. What am I interested in? Who knows? But I can scroll through the news and I can, there we are. Can I keep asking to work from home? Once I've found something I'm interested in, I can just press enter and that will take me to that page. If I've overshot and I'm at risk of doing the weekly quiz, then I can hold shift and then press tab and that will take me backwards. So that's how you can use a keyboard to navigate. It's really simple. You might well have known that, but it is worth just reminding ourselves if you don't use it. Using the enter key, you can interact with any element. It can be more difficult. If you've got a sliding scale or whatever, you might need to use your arrows as well. But for most things, tab, enter, and if you need to, shift and tab to go backwards. Mouse navigation is also really easy. So I'm going to go on Sainsbury's here. I'm going to search for products. How am I going to search for products? I'm just going to get an on-screen keyboard up. So if you use Windows, it's so easy. You just press Control, which is probably your bottom left or just right at the bottom left, the Windows key, which is the one which looks like a window, and O. And you won't see it because I'm not sharing that on the screen because it wasn't open, but that's just going to bring up a keyboard. So I'm going to just share that as well now. That has just brought up this little keyboard here. And now using this, I can search for whatever I fancy. Marmite. There we are, and the thing has brought that up for me already. So fantastic. This is how I can get around using just a keyboard or just a mouse. So that's great. I'll close that down now. Now, given that most of us use technology like a computer, using both a mouse and a keyboard, it's surprising and frustrating when people don't set things up to work for either, or work for both. But it happens an awful lot. So what do we need to know? How are we going to make navigation accessible? Well, the first thing, and if we were only there 5 minutes ago, but we are going to come back to it, is to give things headings. If we've given sections headings and done that correctly, so it's reflected in the underlying code, users are able to just jump between sections. So if I'm navigating by tab, instead of me having to just try and get through a huge block of text or something like that, I can just jump between links and I can get to where I want to go to much more quickly. So giving things headings is not just about making a simple layout. It's also about giving navigation, making navigation more accessible. Next, we're going to have a think about creating meaningful links. So there are 3 ways that you can provide a link to a new web page or a download or whatever you're linking to. We can come to Michael from Lead, and I'm just going to show you these 3 different ways. Here we are, it's in here. So we can either just provide a link. So copy and paste a link from something into text. Now, here we go. So just under descriptive links here, I'm just going to highlight it for you to make it a bit easier. Pretend this is an email which I've received. We've got 3 examples. I thought you might be interested in this article, and then I've put a colon, and then I've just pasted that link, and that's taking you to that news story about Lidl's gin. The next option is I thought you might be interested in this article. Click here for the article, and here's the link. And then finally, I thought you might be interested in this article about how Lidl have been ordered to rebrand their gin. Now, Jen, are you able to put that first poll up? Because I would be interested to see which people think is the best link.
Yep, so you should see it now. Which
Fantastic.
is the best link? Options 1, 2, and 3.
I don't know whether these are descriptive, whether this is anonymous, but I won't call anyone out for getting it wrong, basically, so don't worry about that.
26 out of 36 people. Can you see that, Michael?
I can see we've got 29 now, we've got 30. Okay. Fantastic. So I think there might be 6 people who are just holding out till I tell them the right answer, which is what I always do as well, so don't worry about that. I'm really pleased because we've got a good spread, and there's nothing wrong with, there's really nothing wrong with not knowing what the best way of doing this is. But the best option is option 3, which I think most people have gone. We've still got about 7 out of 10 have said option 3. We'll have a quick look at the different options. The first one, we've just pasted the link. This is all about, this is predominantly about screen reader users. If I'm using a screen reader, I'll jump to that link and it will read out what it says. So I will then hear https://www.bbc.co.uk/news/UK-/East/East-572, etc. That means nothing to me. If I'm looking for something specific, that's meaningless, unless I can remember the URL for each article that I'm interested in. Similarly, I click here for the article. That's only going to read out here for me if I've jumped to that. But if we give a descriptive link, like in option 3, and I've jumped to that, it says, Lidl have been ordered to rebrand their gin. Well, that tells me what I'm going to. So that's meaningful. Option 1 is possibly better than option 2 because it's a bigger area to click. So that's for people who aren't necessarily using a screen reader, because the screen reader will select it no matter how big the link is, no matter how much space on the screen it's taking up, rather. But yeah, option 3 would be the best thing. Now, it's really, really easy to make a meaningful link. So I'm just going to do this underneath. So what you do is you start by selecting the text that you're interested in. I only apologise. None of these exercises seem to be working quite as quickly as they're supposed to. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just do this in an email. It's exactly the same across pretty much everything. So if you're doing something in Microsoft Word and you want to put a link in, it's exactly the same process. If you do it in an email, it's the same process. If you do it on WordPress, it's the same process. So we're going to just put some text down. What's this article here? Should I be working from home or going back to the office? We're going to go to wherever we're entering our text. Should I be working from home? And we're going to put what we want the link to be down. So this is what I want to be visible on the page. Now I've got a couple of options. The first is I can come down to here. There's a thing which looks like a chain, and I can press that. It's going to. This is to insert a link, and then I just need to select it from the thing there because I can make that a download as well. So display as, should I be working from home? That's what I want. And then the web address is what it's linking to. So in this case, it's that article there. I press OK, and ta-da, it's changed its color. You might see that's purple. That would display as blue to other people, and it's also underlined. Now, if I was to click on that, it's going to take me to that article. But I can also do this another way. This is how I normally do it. It's a little bit simpler. Should I be working from home? Highlight what you want, and then just press Control and press K. It's going to bring up exactly that same menu, and you can just paste that link in there, press OK, and voila, we've got a meaningful link. This would be exactly the same in WordPress, but it's just not going to play ball at the moment. It's going to be the same in a Microsoft Word document. It's going to be the same pretty much wherever. Look for that little chain link or Control and K, and then enter what you want. So this is a really, really easy accessibility fix. It's something which is overlooked. I do it all the time. I just paste a link in, or I say click here because I can't think what I'm supposed to be, I can't think what I'm trying to say. But with a little bit more effort on my part, with a bit of effort on everyone's part, we can make things really accessible very, very simply with links. And if WordPress is going to play ball, maybe we'll come back to looking at things towards the end. So if anyone needs to shoot off at 3 or half 3 or whatever, they're able to. But we can also link to within places in a document. So Arts Council England, I want to find out about the Arts Capital Lottery. I can click on it here, and it takes me to the right part of the page. So rather than having to scroll down, if we pretend this is a really long article, I can just click here, and it zooms me straight to the right place. And towards the end of this, we'll come back to WordPress, see if it's playing ball, and go from there. I know I said it's super simple. It is super simple, but my laptop is about 14 years old and is struggling now. The next thing we're going to think about are click areas. So this is the space in which a user can click. It might be to open a program, proceed to the next page, accept the terms and conditions, something like that. So just something which you can interact with. How big is the space which you've got to interact with it? Small click areas make navigation really accessible for mouse, trackpad, and touchscreen users. So I don't know if you've ever tried doing anything on your phone where you've got to accept the terms and conditions, and it is tiny. You're trying to find the smallest finger to touch it, and you just can't because you're touching a mammoth area and it's not recognizing you're touching that specific tiny little bit. If instead of making really small click areas, we make larger click areas, so maybe if we're doing things online, resize buttons, make buttons nice and big, making it nice and easy for people with impaired mobility. So maybe it's difficult to maneuver or manipulate a mouse across the screen to get to something, or you might have a mobility impairment and something like Parkinson's, and it's difficult to have the dexterity to keep something in the right place. If you've got a nice large click area, that's less important. And the final thing we're going to talk about for navigation are dynamic menus, and specifically avoiding them. So we're going to come across to Sainsbury's now. I'm going to try doing some of my grocery shopping. So I want lemon curd and frozen spinach because those are the best things in the world. But I'm going to turn on a disability simulator. So I've got one downloaded here. This is called Web Disability Simulator, but there are loads and loads and loads of these. I'm going to select a mobility impairment, Parkinson's, and then there we are. So you might be able to see that the mouse is just moving. This is moving far more than I can do it, like this. So this is simulating having Parkinson's. And this is really important for trying to work out how things are accessible. It's really, really tricky to understand everyone's needs from your own perspective. So if we can use a disability simulator or something like that, that's fantastic. We're going to open our eyes to a whole new world of things. I've always struggled getting my head around color blindness, and I can use a disability simulator and work out accessible color choices and find things which don't work. So that's a really good thing. Now we've got a dynamic menu here. So I've hovered my mouse over groceries. I've not touched anything. I've not clicked on anything. I've just hovered it over and it's brought up a menu. And the next sub-menus, they all open because I'm just hovering my mouse over it. Now, I want my frozen spinach. So I'm going to try and come down to frozen. But no, it's just jittering all over the place and I can't actually select. It's a real effort to keep it on frozen long enough to move across to the next menu. So here we are. I've got adult drinks up now, but I don't want that. I want to be back across and into frozen. So here we are. I've got across to frozen. Fantastic. I'm assuming probably fruit, vegetables, and herbs. Probably where frozen spinach is. But no. So as you can see, it's really, really, it's painful watching how difficult it is to get across to these things. And that's the problem with a dynamic menu. If things are appearing and disappearing based on where you're hovering your mouse, then anyone who's got any problem or any impairment with holding their mouse in the same position, in holding their mouse still or still enough to click in that area, is going to be really disadvantaged. I'm not singling Sainsbury's out. All of the big supermarkets have exactly this thing. They look really fancy, but they're really, really pants. You know, there's no point having something which doesn't work for everybody, because that's not as good as something which does work for everybody. So if you're doing something on WordPress, just a normal static menu. It's the sort of preset stuff that you've got on WordPress. You have to make an active decision to get this wrong. So this is really, really good. But I'd like to talk about the dynamic menus because they look fancy. You might think, that's really cool, I'm going to do that. But I would really advise avoiding that wherever possible. So I'm just going to nip back to the presentation. So yeah, just recapping what we've thought about for navigation. Give meaningful headings, give sections headings, and we're going to be aiding navigation for keyboard users. Meaningful links aid navigation for keyboard users as well. Large click areas means anyone using a mouse, trackpad, touchscreen, anything like that has a much easier time of it. And finally, if we can avoid dynamic menus, then we're going to aid everybody with navigation. I don't have any mobility impairments, but I've struggled with dynamic menus before, particularly if my computer's running a bit slowly. It can take quite a while for me to get where I'm supposed to be going or where I'm trying to go. The final part of this talk, I'm going to whiz through this a little bit, I'm afraid, because it is 3 o'clock now, are forms. So forms are any interface that allows people to input data. That sounds really complicated, but it's basically if I, as the user, can input data, then we've got a form. So it doesn't have to be like a traditional form. It could be a login box. It could be card details. I could be selecting what toppings I want on my pizza. Those are all forms of a kind. Forms in and of themselves are no more important for disabled people than they are for non-disabled people, but forms are ubiquitous and how we interact with things. So if something's gone wrong, then there's a lot of damage that we can do like that. So if we can get forms right, we've done another really good step. Just as a statistic, this is from MenCap. This is talking about forms in a more traditional setting, I suppose. But 1 in 3 people with a learning difficulty who is happy to work has been unable to apply for a job because the application form was inaccessible. So it's not that they weren't qualified, it's not that they didn't have the experience, they were physically unable to get through the application process because the form was not accessible. I don't know if anyone's done any job searches recently and they've applied for any jobs recently, but it can be really tricky using some forms which seem to be Microsoft Word tables squished into a page, and then you've got to copy and paste your CV into these tiny little boxes. It's a nightmare. So we're not looking to just improve the lives of people with learning difficulties. Everyone's life is improved if we get forms right. So poorly designed forms can impede blind and visually impaired people too, people with mobility and dexterity impairments, and as I touched on, everyone who tries to use it. So we're going to think about 4 ways to make a good form. And then we're going to also think about outsourcing some of that to a computer so we don't have to worry about it, because an easy life is much better than a really complicated one. So the 4 steps to a good form are thinking about the layout. So we're back to layout again, because it is that key and it's that fundamental. Including instructions, thinking about our questions and answers, or thinking about whatever's being input, and validating data. So first things first, we are back to layout. And like I said, this is because it is so fundamental. Layout is such a huge thing. I really could spend days talking about layout. This is just another part of layout. Here we've got a mailing list sign up thing. It's not a very accessible one. Now it looks like it's quite good. We've got name, please enter here, etc. But the way this is going to be formatted means that if I'm coming across as a screen reader user, it will read out join our mailing list and then name, and then it will read out email because it's going left to right, top to bottom. Then it will say please enter here, please enter here. Then it will say phone number, postcode, please enter here, please enter here. Now, by the time it's got to the first please enter here, I'm going to have forgotten what's supposed to go in that box. So having a bad layout means that we're really hindering the ability of people to correctly fill out forms. And you know what it's like when you're trying to fill out a form online. If it's not right, if the data's not how it wants it, you just can't proceed more often than not. And that's a source of real frustration. So if we were to change this round and have name, please enter here, email, please enter here, just rejig this form slightly, well, there we are. We've got an accessible form. We've just changed the layout slightly, and we've made it much more accessible for people using screen readers. And it's not only people using screen readers, but that's a really good example of how to a really good illustration for that point. The next thing we're going to talk about are including instructions. Oh no, we've gone too far now, haven't we? I've been doing some training in my day job recently. And at the end of one of the sessions I've been doing, there was a quiz. And one of the questions in that quiz was to pick out something which you considered to be important to fulfill a process that we're learning about. There are about 10 answers there. Of those 10 answers, 3 seemed plausible, but there was one which was like clearly the right answer. 2 more which you think, yeah, they're good, but they're not the right answer. I selected the one right answer and submitted it, and I was told I'd failed the question because I hadn't selected the 3 correct answers. Nowhere in the question had it told me that there were 3 right answers, or that I could select more than one answer, or anything like that. So if we need data input in a certain format, we need to make sure we're telling people. If we're going through a form and things aren't in the right format, but people don't know, they're not going to be able to progress. If you're doing something perhaps a bit more important than my training quiz, and it's penalizing you for getting something wrong, We should only be penalising people for getting something wrong if they've got it wrong because they didn't know the answer. We shouldn't be penalising people for not understanding unclear instructions. So the example here, if I want your date of birth, day, hyphen, month, hyphen, year, I need to put that. I can't just put a blank box for you to enter your date of birth in because you might put the 1st of June, 1987 or 28/10, 96, something like that. We need to have that format included if the format's important. If it's not, it doesn't matter. Third thing for forms, we need to think about questions and answers. So, Jen, if I could have poll 2 up, we're going to just illustrate why we need to think about questions and answers. So we need to make sure that we're asking the questions that are going to give us the kinds of answers that we want. So we've got a nice question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how far through the session do you hope we are? 1, 2, 3, or 5? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, sorry. Please vote now. Yeah. What does it mean? Is 1 near the end? Is if people who are voting 4 and 5 hoping that we're still really near the beginning? I hope not, because we are near the end. A question like this is meaningless if we've got a scale and we've not anchored it properly. So it's a weird question anyway, and this is why we need to think about questions. We need to really seriously sit down and think about questions before we start trying to make a poll or a form like that. Make sure that the question that we're asking is going to give us the responses we want. And I don't mean the exact answers we want, but the kind of answers we want. So if I was, I don't know, running to be an MP or something like that, and I was putting something through everyone's door saying, who are you thinking of voting for? Really, it's only useful if I've got the name of every candidate on there. And presumably there's a way of that getting back to me. If I've just put my name on there, that might be the answer that I want, but it's still not meaningful because I've not got a true reflection of people's answers. So we don't need to have the answer specifically that I want, but we need to give people the option of giving the kind of answer which is actually relevant to the question we're trying to ask. Asking questions is a real skill, and it does take a lot of thinking about. It sounds really stupid, but for lots of us in our lives, we don't actually ask the questions we mean. We ask the question which is sort of there, and people respond to it, and we both know what we know what everyone means, but we don't necessarily put in the exact words what we want and what we're expecting from people. And again, just another example, if we could have poll number 3, please, Jen. How good are you finding this course? Yes or no? Now, if you look very carefully, you might see that doesn't really make sense. You know, are you finding it good? Maybe that would be yes, maybe that would be no. But how good? Well, that's a scaling question. Yes or no don't really work. So I'm going to end the polling there, just because it's just another way of thinking about making sure we're asking the right questions to get the right answers. And the final thing with forms are validating our data. Before I worked for Lead, I worked in local government. One day I was trying to submit a form which a customer had posted into us, and I just could not get it to go through. It's a really, really long form. It's quite complicated. Get to submit, and it was telling me that there was an error, but it didn't tell me what the error was. I spent about 45 minutes looking through all of the questions. There were some mandatory questions, there were some optional questions. Some were free text boxes, so you could write whatever you want. Some were radio buttons, some were tick boxes, etc. After about 45 minutes, I gave up, and I very shamefacedly went to my manager and said, look, Stuart, I'm really sorry. I just don't understand what's wrong. He came and sat with me for over an hour, and it was only after an hour he spotted that I'd put that day's date as the 31st of April. I might still be there to this very day trying to work out that error because it really didn't make a lot of sense to me. If the data had been validated, it would have taken me 2 seconds because it would have flagged up and it said, this is an invalid date, or this doesn't exist, or something like that. And I wouldn't have been able to put the 31st of April. And I'd have been able to submit my form and use the rest of my day in a much better way than I had. But a lack of data validation wasted 2 hours of my day doing that. And I'm sure we've all gone through forms where it just says there's an error or it doesn't let us submit, but it doesn't tell us what the problem is or even where the problem is. So validating your data is more complicated than we're actually going to think about in today's talk, because we're going to think about outsourcing this instead. So one of the best ways of doing this is to use a forms builder. Now, we can use something like Microsoft Forms. There are loads of other places that do it. Cognito Forms, Jot Forms, SurveyMonkey, all these sorts of things. They have data validation there. You can do it on WordPress as well. WordPress has it automatically there if you make something a mandatory question. But if you were doing something which maybe not on WordPress and you wanted to make a form, use a forms builder. It's so much simpler. It's sort of the difference between, hand washing all your clothes in a stream like you're in the 1600s or putting stuff in a washing machine. Just do it in the washing machine. Save yourself all that time and effort. So this is a forms builder. This is from some classes that Lead ran a little while ago. We've got our questions there. If I was to submit this, if I was to go through this without answering that mandatory question up at the top, it would say, you have not answered question 1. And it would flag it up with a red outline, and it'd be really simple for me to see which question I've not done. None of the other questions are mandatory. Oh, no, sorry, 4, 5, and 6, 4 and 5 are mandatory, and that's seeing how people feel about the online accessibility stuff that we were talking about then. Because that's the data which we really want to get. If you're not comfortable sharing that, then we don't want you to submit the form. This does all the data validation for us, so we don't need to worry. It's more complicated to do things like this from scratch, and therefore just don't worry about it. Right, we're back to our presentation. Or are we? Oh, come on. Sorry. What on earth is happening? Right. Whilst I'm waiting for everything to suddenly reappear, if it will it? We are going to talk about actually putting this into good practice. So that's all well and good thinking about what I've said, but are you going to remember it beyond 3:30? Possibly not. There have been lots of things that we've talked about. So yeah, this is another example of outsourcing things to a computer, and it is a much better way of doing it than pretty much anything else that we can do. So we're going to have a look at an accessibility review. So we're going to go back onto the BBC, and I'm going to run an accessibility reviewer. This is just like a little widget, so it's a plugin basically. You can download it through your browser. The one I'm going to use is called Wave. It's made by W3. They're the organization that produces the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and that's sort of like a set of rules on how to make accessible digital content, sort of international, and it's fantastic. They're the authority on this, and this is their accessibility reviewer. So it's really good, straightforward and simple to use, and at the same time it covers a lot. So I've got Wave as a plugin here. I'm going to click it, and in a second it will pop up on my screen, and then I can run it across this. If you don't have Edge or Firefox, which are the two browsers it runs on, you can literally copy and paste the page or the URL of the page you want to review into Wave. So you can go on Wave's homepage and copy and paste it, and it will still scan things. So it doesn't matter what browser you've got. You can do this. Now, Wave is telling me that the BBC's page is pretty good, actually. There are no big errors. There are no contrast errors. It's got some alerts for things which could be better, but that's fine. I was having a look on the Guardian yesterday at this, so let's have a look and see what we've got on the Guardian, because the Guardian is not getting it right as often. So I'm just going to run Wave again and see what it has to say here. But this is going through the whole page and picking up everything. So there are things that we're not going to think of. It's going to pick up things which we're not going to be able to fix by ourselves. It's going to pick up things which we don't understand necessarily as issues. But the things which we do understand, the things which we are able to fix, or the things which a fix for is just a Google away, it's going to highlight those as well. So here we've got 8 errors, 10 contrast errors, and 23 alerts. So if we have a look here, it's highlighting that lots of the pictures don't have alt text, which now alt text we're going to come, so this is down here in the 27 features, 16 null or empty alternative text. Alt text is a really key accessibility tool. We're talking about it next week, so I'm not going to blather on about it now, but it's a massively important thing. 16 empty alt text box is a bit of an issue. We've got some contrast problems as well, it was talking about. And again, we really should be getting better from this. So going forwards, use something like Wave. It's free. Have a look at your own organization's website using something like Wave. It won't just do the features we've talked about today. Like I said, it will do loads more, which is great, because if you can't come along next week or you don't fancy it, you can still have access to a wealth of accessibility knowledge. So yeah, that brings us hurtling towards the end of today's talk. Sorry it's run over a bit. It was supposed to be a little bit more involved, but I think I might have to do this on a different computer for next week, which works a little bit more quickly. That's brought me to the end. I'm just going to do those take-home points really, really quickly. So I'm just going to get the slide up for that. And here we go. So take-home points are simple layouts, so logical, relevant, streamlined, not having loads and loads of stuff on the page to distract you or to make things difficult to find. Keep it simple and it's easy to use. Format headings properly so we can actually navigate through things, and that makes a simple layout as well. Meaningful links, so Control K, or just clicking that little chain button and describing where we're going, rather than just telling us or just saying here or something like that. Big click areas to make it nice and easy to click on. Static menus, again, so it's nice and easy to use. If we've got a form, tell people what format you want data in. So it doesn't have to be a big form. If I'm asking for your email address, let me know that, say maybe, for example, example@mail.com, something like that, just so I know what I'm expected to input. Outsource more complicated forms to form builders because they do it all for you. And finally, review your own content and spaces using something like Wave. And you can just Google W3 Wave, bring it up there, and you'll have it up and running in 5 minutes. And you might be shocked, you might be surprised, you might be upset to find what you've got wrong. Anyway, that's enough talking from me. Over to the questions, and I appreciate that's really going to be me talking a bit more. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or shout them out, turn yourself off mute, and then we can go from there. I've got my email address on the screen, so if there's anything you want to ask going forwards, you can do that as well. And just whilst I'm seeing if anyone does want to put anything in the chat, I just want to thank you very much, Jen, for being a fantastic assistant and for inviting me along. So thanks for the curve from Third Sector Labs. I should have this written down somewhere. I feel like I'm a rock star on tour, saying, "Oh, hello, Wembley," but yeah, it's not that.
You've got some
so thank you very much for that.
Coming in now, but that was great, Michael. It's like really giving people really tangible things to go and actually look at their own organisation websites now and be able to kind of spot errors right away. I put the link to Wave in there, and I'm already popping some sites that I know of into it, and it's a really, really useful tool. I didn't know about that. It's brilliant. So thank you for that.
Okay,
We've
that's no
got some
problem.
questions
Okay, so I'll
in the chat.
start
I'll
at the
let
top.
you go for that.
So we'll start with Ethan. So what's your experience of design companies' appreciation or lack thereof of accessibility requirements? Disappointing, underwhelming would be it. If you were to Google alt text and look through the first couple of pages of Google, alt text is specifically an accessibility thing, but half the results that you'll find are about using it for marketing and using it to boost your website using search engine optimization. There's a way of boosting things for SEO without using alt text, and yet people think, well, that's easy. And then it means if you've got a visual impairment and use a screen reader, you're getting a list of tags and it's meaningless and you can't access what the actual picture's of. So it's really it is an uphill battle to make people understand that accessibility is an important thing. When I was writing some courses last year, and I was doing a course just on keyboard navigation, and it's a similar sort of length. So these are all like sort of lovingly ripped off a set of courses I made last year, which is why it's overrun, because they were all an hour, and I've got 3 hour-and-a-half sessions or so in there. But we had a look at Topshop. Topshop's website was an absolute catastrophe. It's a real shame that Topshop closed down, because it's really difficult to find a website as bad as Topshop's were. If you're trying to do any keyboard navigation, it wouldn't bring up a cursor, so you could not know where you were on the screen, unless you were using something like a screen reader. And not always very useful for people if they've not got visual impairment. They might not know about them. They might find it really annoying having something reading loads of stuff out. So, Topshop was a big company for which there can be no excuses. The company which designed Porsche's website, they've updated this again since then, and they've made it more accessible. When we ran the sessions, we had people write a letter to Porsche to ask them to change their website. They have changed the website. I'm not going to pretend it was because of us, but I would like to think it was. But everything was dynamic, and you couldn't get anywhere doing anything if you couldn't hold your mouse in a certain position. So, yeah, that would be sort of from a digital perspective. I appreciate it's not Porsche making their website. They've got a digital consultancy are doing it. They're a massive company. They've got however many millions or billions coming in, and yet they can't make something simple for someone to use if they can't hold a mouse still. Sort of talking more generally, and away from sort of digital stuff, there was a building built in, I think it was New York, a couple of years ago, and it's a viewing platform over, I'm sure it's over the site of where the two towers were, or something like that. It's a huge building, and the entire thing is made of staircases. It's staircase, platform, staircase, platform, staircase, platform. At no point in the entire design or building of that building did anyone think about people with impaired mobility, maybe people with small children, wheelchair users, people who use mobility aids, or anything like that. So however many millions of dollars were spent on building this building, and there are a load of people who aren't able to access it. There's a lift all the way up to the top, but it's not really the point that you can go up to the top and you come back down in the lift. So I would say there is a huge lack of appreciation of accessibility, why it's important. Talking about the alt text again, if people don't necessarily know it's an accessibility thing, or people think, well, actually, I'm not trying to reach blind people, so it doesn't matter. But it does matter. It really, really does matter. And there is so much more to do. Particularly, there are a lot of bigger companies who really do badly at it. I'm going to move on to the next question, otherwise I'm going to ramble on. It's going to be 5 o'clock and you're all still going to be here thinking, I want to go, but he's not answered my question. Katrina's asked, is there any software you can recommend for captions? So it depends what you're wanting to do, Katrina. If you're doing live captioning, then something like Zoom, Teams, they've got fairly good live captioning. If you use Teams, Teams is much better for it, because Microsoft's speech engine is much, much better than Zoom's. So you can just turn it on your presentation and do that. This is quite cool. If you're doing a PowerPoint presentation, if you put things into full screen mode, you can turn on subtitles, and it's subtitles like that as well, which is really, really useful. With the problems I've been having, I've not been able to go into full screen mode, so I can't do that. But beyond that, if you use something like Streamcast, it's a paid for service. That's very, very good. That's really, really accurate. But we're then looking at the balance of, I'm in the third sector. Do I have the budget for this, or can I find a better way of doing it? If you're not doing live things, YouTube, upload things to YouTube. It will do the subtitling for you, and then just go back through and make sure that the subtitles are actually what is being said. So it's not putting fairies instead of ferries or something like that. But yeah, if you're doing something live, probably just try and do it through Teams, turn subtitles on, or let people turn subtitles on, and you're done. That's all you need to do. It's fantastic. If you're doing things which aren't live, but you want something on social media, upload it to YouTube and then share it from YouTube. So if you've got something on Facebook, share your YouTube video. Facebook also does auto captioning. It's not as good as YouTube's. I would, really, I'm going to die on that hill. YouTube is fantastic for accessibility stuff. That would be the way I'd be going about it anyway. There are definitely other places out there, but YouTube's free and it's easy to use. So why reinvent the wheel?
Michael, I've been getting a lot of adverts recently for Otter.ai. Have you got any opinion on that?
I've not heard of that one.
You've not heard of that one? That's fine.
No. If it's free, then fantastic. If it's not free, there are free solutions out there. Okay. And if we're all in the third sector, then yeah, it'd be fantastic to have a huge budget to devote to getting things spot on, but we've got to find that balance. And if you can do something for free, do that. Focus on what you're trying to do as well with that money. So I'm going to jump to Alice Clark now. So if you want to do a big review of accessibility in many areas of your organization, do you have any advice for doing this across the whole organization, e.g. hiring a consultant? I would say that is not a bad idea to hire a consultant, Alice, purely because if you're doing it across if you're doing it across a really big area, and then you're going to be looking to implement things from there, if you've got a consultant to look through it, they're going to be giving you the recommendations, telling you how to improve it, telling you what to do. So you're starting off 2 or 3 steps further forwards than if you've just used something for free, like WebAIM. With the alt text stuff on The Guardian, for example, it's flagged it up. That's quite a nice, easy fix. Some of the other things, they're a bit more tricky to do. So if the accessibility consultant is coming around and saying, right, these are the things you need to change, this is how you change them, this is what it should look like at the end, you're a couple of steps further forwards. And it also means that you know that you're going to have that everything will have been gone through. So if you've got a big website and you're trying to paste every page, or you're trying to run something like Wave on every page, you know full well there's going to be a couple of pages which have just been forgotten about. And yeah, I would say if you're doing something big, get someone in to do it. It's a bit like, if you're painting the living room, that's fine. But if you're, I don't know, converting the garage, you probably want someone who's got the skills in to do it. That would be my advice. But obviously, like I said, third sector, that's the dream. It is expensive. Where do you put that balance? I can't tell you that. But if you've got a big job, you're possibly going to save as much time getting someone who knows what they're doing it. Eden said about she finds it really hard to get people to take accessibility seriously. Yes, yeah. The training I've been doing, I know I'm annoying people because it's been going for 5 weeks now, but almost everything that I say is, yeah, but what about disabled people? Well, that's really good, but you've forgotten disabled people. Or that's a really nice, presentation, but could a disabled person read that? Is the contrast right? And these are big training organizations getting things wrong. And yeah, I appreciate I'm coming to this really from a disability perspective. I don't know how to use computers any more than anyone else who's just grown up with a computer. I don't know the coding. I don't know this. I don't know that. I care about disabled people and I want things to work for disabled people. So that's what I'm interested in. If there's something which can be made better, maybe I'll know how to do it, maybe I won't, but it should be made better, and that's the important thing. And that seems like a really big cognitive leap for a lot of people to just go, well, do you know what? Maybe a disabled person is going to use this form, or is going to look at this presentation, or is going to be doing something. I remember last year I was talking to an organisation about something which they'd done, and they said, well, we understand what you're saying, Michael, but we're not really worried about that because anyone with visual impairments is just going to be using a screen reader. You think, well, that's not the case. You know, maybe if I was to be involved in an accident tomorrow and I was to lose my vision, I'd know how to use a screen reader and I'd know about a screen reader. But if I was my grandmother, you know, she's elderly, she's not grown up with a computer, her vision's going, she's lived her life with good sight, and then it's been going and going and going. She's not going to know how to use a screen reader, but she should still be able to access things. And if the fix to that is just making things higher contrast, well, why on earth aren't you doing that? It's not enough to say, well, disabled people have the solutions themselves. So why are we bothering? Well, not everyone does. Not everyone knows how to use things. Not everyone's got access to things. And actually, for a lot of accessibility things, it's not just about disabled people. It's about everyone. Make it right for everyone. Why on earth would you not do that? So Dare has said, are there any software that you recommend for captions? So we've had that question already. I think I've covered that. But if I haven't, do let me know. Philip has said, we got a quote last week from a well-known accessibility organisation. We were quoted £3,000 for an audit on 5 pages. That is a lot of money, Philip. That really is a lot of money for 5 pages. I would certainly play the field and see if you could find better quotes. That's really, really, really the top end of things. But it's the same with builders. It's the same with getting your MOT. It was the same with doing anything. There will definitely be places which are charging more and charging less. Have a look, get quotes, see what they would, be able to do, see what they would, commit to doing, and see what prices it's for, and then make a decision on whether or not that's right for you. I mean, in many ways, it's not like getting your MOT because you get to the garage, you put your car in, and then they phone you up and say, well, right, it's going to be, 500 quid to fix this before we can pass your MOT. By that point, it's too late. But if you get someone to look through, give you a quote, tell you what they're going to do, then you can make a decision on whether or not that's actually worth it. Philip has just put, it's actually the going rate for accessibility audits. Gov.uk states you could expect to pay a third party up to 1,300 a day. You should get quotes from companies that provide accessibility audits. That's all well and good, but I can't imagine, I can't really see why it would take them 3 days to do the 5 pages. So yes, it is expensive, and yes, particularly if there's lots of things involved with it, it's going to take a bit longer. But that still seems, if they're charging a day rate of £1,300, say, then maybe have a check with them to see whether they could do it a bit more quickly, because that is taking the mick a bit, in my opinion. And Jen has been putting what she's learned into good practice. Thank you very much, Jen. She's provided a meaningful link, and as you can see, you can do it in the comments. So there's you can do it pretty much everywhere. Control K or link button as well. Just go from that. If that's one thing which I'll take away from today, make meaningful links. Just don't put click here. So Philip was saying they're going to do manual tests such as using screen readers, etc. Then I discovered Wave, and we're going to do it in-house after a bit of training. Fantastic. So yeah, go for it, Philip. Do it in-house. Have a play around, but do think about what they're saying. So they're going to be doing it from using screen readers, etc. It's really worthwhile not just relying on what Wave does, but use some disability simulators, use screen readers, use other accessible technology, and go through it from that. Try it across a range of devices. So just because something works on your computer doesn't mean it's going to work on your phone very well. Have that play around, see how you go. Depending on how big your website is, and I know you said 5 pages, it's probably going to be better for you to do that than spend £3,000 on it. But yeah, that would be my advice. Even if you don't get everything right, if you've done a couple of things right, well, then that's better than it was before. So, kudos to you for doing that. Yeah. Right, I'm open to any verbal questions if anyone's got anything they want to shout out. I know it's not always easy to use the chat if you're on your phone, particularly. So feel free to come off mute because you are all on mute and I won't hear you if you're shouting otherwise. And most of you got your cameras off, so I can't even see you.
Just before that, obviously anybody's welcome to kind of hang about and ask in a smaller group if you feel more comfortable. I just wanted to flag that I have popped the feedback form in the chat. So after the session, if you get a wee second, it'd be great if you could just tell us what you thought of today. It's a kind of less than 2-minute Google form. I've used a form builder for that, so you should have a nice accessible experience. And there's also a link to our upcoming workshops as part of the Curve series. So Michael is doing 2 more workshops with us around kind of the similar theme. They're in the next kind of couple of weeks. We've got making your online presence more accessible, and that's images, graphics and text. That's on the 4th of June. And on the 18th of June, we're looking at promoting digital security for service users with low IT digital skills or confidence. And that's on the 18th of June. So there's space still available for them. I'm going to cap it soon. That's not to hurry you or anything, but we do have a kind of limited number of tickets that we're giving away. I'll be quiet now. That's my wee bit done. If you've got anything else you want to ask Michael, please feel free to jump in.